The sovereign citizens movement is a decentralized anti-governmental ideology primarily active in English-speaking countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand. It consists of individuals who reject the legitimacy of government authority, claiming personal sovereignty that exempts them from laws, taxes, and regulations unless they explicitly consent. Adherents often engage in pseudo-legal practices, conspiracy theories, and sometimes criminal activities, leading organizations like the FBI to classify them as domestic extremists. The movement is not a formal organization but a loose network of believers who share core ideas through seminars, online forums, and self-published materials. The roots of the sovereign citizens movement trace back to the early 1970s in the United States, emerging from a blend of tax protests and their arguments, far-right ideologies, and concepts that had circulated since the 1950s based on a misreading of the law. It was heavily influenced by the Posse Comitatus, a white supremacist and anti-Semitic group founded in 1971 by William Potter Gale, a Christian identity minister and former John Birch Society member. Posse Comitatus promoted the idea that county sheriffs were the highest legitimate authority, operating under a distorted version of common law derived from biblical interpretations, while rejecting federal and state governments as tools of Jewish conspiracy. The movement gained momentum during the late 1970s and 1980s American farm crisis, when economic hardships like foreclosures fueled anti-government sentiment among rural communities. Key figures like Gordon Kahl, a Posse Comitatus member, became martyrs after his 1983 shootout with law enforcement, which killed 2 federal marshals and led to Kahl's death. Roger Elvick, another influential figure, developed fraudulent redemption schemes in the 1980s, promising debt relief through tactics, which, though based in law, were not lawful. By the 1990s, the movement evolved beyond its overtly racist origins, attracting a more diverse following, including African Americans through variants like the Moorish Science Temple-influenced Moorish sovereigns. Notable events include the 1996 Montana Freeman Standoff, a 81-day siege involving sovereign citizens who rejected federal authority, and the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, where perpetrator Terry Nichols subscribed to sovereign ideas. The term sovereign citizen largely replaced Posse Comitatus by the late 1990s as the ideology spread. Note, the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing was committed by Timothy McVeigh, with assistance from Terry Nichols. McVeigh orchestrated the attack, while Nichols helped plan and prepare the explosives. The bombing resulted in the deaths of 168 people and is considered one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. In the 2000s, the movement expanded internationally, inspiring the Freeman on the Land variant in Canada, which spread to other Commonwealth nations. Figures like Winston Shrout exported ideas through global seminars, while in the 2010s, leaders like Bruce Doucette established fake, common law courts, leading to his 2018 conviction for racketeering. Recent events include sovereign-influenced participation in the 2021 U.S. Capitol riot and plots like the 2022 German coup attempt. At its core, the sovereign citizen's philosophy revolves around the rejection of government legitimacy, viewing the modern state, particularly the U.S. federal government, as an illegitimate corporation that replaced the original republic. Adherents believe individuals are inherently sovereign, flesh and blood, beings who can opt out of laws by withholding consent, often declaring phrases like, "I do not consent," during encounters with authorities. A foundational belief is the strawman theory, which posits that at birth, the government creates a fictional corporate entity, the strawman, identical to the person's name in all capital letters on documents like birth certificates. This strawman is allegedly used as collateral for national debt since the U.S. abandoned the gold standard in 1933, with secret treasury accounts holding millions for each citizen. Sovereigns claim they can redeem these funds or discharge debts by filing pseudo-legal documents, such as writing, "accepted for value," on bills. The philosophy draws on misinterpretations of common law, admiralty law, and historical documents like the Magna Carta or the Moroccan-American Treaty of 1786, for Moorish variants, who claim immunity as descendants of ancient Moors. Believers reject obligations like taxes, driver's licenses, and vehicle registrations, asserting a constitutional right to travel without restrictions. Many subscribe to conspiracy theories involving international bankers, often coded anti-Semitism, controlling governments. There is of course a weakness in this philosophy and a misunderstanding of the law which is not due totally to a misreading of the statutes. Even if we give the conventional sovereign citizen some grace as to their logical analysis of the situation, the conclusions, whatever they may be, are moot. To understand why this is so, one has to understand the law. To understand that we need to dig deeper than what we find in law libraries. There are, in this matrix, only two paths we can follow. There are, by logical necessity, two realities or cultures. There are two races and two ways of thinking. The differences are sharp and deep and are as complete as the difference between good and evil. The sovereign citizens movement was a misconstrued attempt to extricate the individual from the exploitative state, but the movement misunderstood the situation. We cannot use the law to defeat the law. To go into a court and argue the law is to validate the law, regardless of how one might protest that one is endeavoring to do the opposite. Even so, the sovereign citizens movement misconstrued the situation, and indeed, the nature of the law. It is not the law that is the issue, it is the extrajudicial foundation of the law. Regardless of how insistent the state is that it is founded on the law, the actual fact is that the law is founded on the monopoly on violence the state has. It is not a matter of who has the best legal argument, it is who has the biggest military, or the greatest capacity to destroy their opponent's ability to resist. To be clear, between the individual and the state, that would be the state. What we need to comprehend is that if a person does not accept the existence of God, he or she has nothing left but the limited power of a human and no path to legitimizing their concerns. Everyone on this planet has an opinion and the same relative amount of physical power. One could overpower one or two persons, but that is rarely enough to change the trajectory of society. The sovereign citizen is in no position to seriously challenge the state. All those other sovereign citizens ultimately will oppose any citizen, sovereign or not, that becomes problematical. Humans create devices called idols to validate their opinions. One needs to give one's opinions greater validity than those of others. For the sovereign citizen, this is the concept of individual sovereignty. However, this is a poorly considered idol. We cannot all have or be sovereign because we all have different opinions and different levels of ability. In the face of any amassed force, we cannot exercise sovereignty, and there will always be those who will trade some level of personal sovereignty to achieve group sovereignty. There is only one problem, and everything else is a symptom of that problem. The problem is parasitism or free riding. This is evil because we each have a right to what we create, and no one has a right to anything we have produced or created. This is a sovereign right and inalienable. We all have a right to be paid for all the work we do, and therefore we have no obligation to subsidize anyone or anything. He who will not work, neither does he eat. To make this into a reality requires a republic owned as a right by those who created it. Only citizens have a right to the nation, and only citizens have the right and power to define who a citizen is. Citizenship must be validated, and the only agency with the right to validate citizenship is the creators of the jurisdiction that validates them. This authority is a citizens' assembly. That is, the only agency with the right to validate citizenship is an assembly of citizens. The right and authority of validating citizenship is embedded in the principle of subsidiarity. All power remains with the lowest reasonable level. We take advantage of the first possible solution. A person does not take up residence in a nation, per se. We occupy a small group's jurisdiction. It is our neighbors who know us and who can vouch for us or deny us a certificate of verification. This is just one more issue the sovereign citizens movement failed to appreciate. You cannot be sovereign if you have no say in who shares your jurisdiction. If you have no right to what you created, you have no rights. Crucial to this right is the right to the nation you and your ancestors created. If we lose the right to our nations by losing the right to determine who is a citizen, we are nothing more than a domesticated beast.